Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. So I'm Executive Director with Environmental Health Trust, and Dr. Deborah Davis founded and is President of Environmental Health Trust. We are a scientific think tank. We educate policymakers, create public awareness programs on environmental health issues where prevention works. And our focus right now is on cell phone radiation, which includes wireless, Wi-Fi, and I'm going to talk about 5G. I'm going to be covering a lot of issues tonight. There's also going to be a panel later where I'll be talking with Katie Singer and another doctor on this issue. So this is a huge issue. Our website is Environmental Health Trust, ehtrust.org. Please go there for references and more information. And this is our website, Environmental Health Trust. So Dr. Deborah Lee Davis wrote The Secret History of the War on Cancer, which is an incredible read about how leading scientists knew in the 1930s that radiation and chemicals and pesticides were harmful to our health. But because of money and industry, power, and things that happened in World War II, a lot of that got buried. And we're focusing on treatment rather than prevention, which is the cure. Her book, Disconnect, takes the last chapter of The Secret History of the War on Cancer a step further, because her last chapter is on cell phone radiation. Disconnect goes into the stories of scientists who have done research on cell phone radiation, found effects, and then been attacked having fraud, or lines were changed out of papers last minute, and a whole series of incredible and important history that people need to understand. Because when I first talk about cell phones, wireless, or this new technology, Wi-Fi technology, people say, but I never heard that there was a problem with that. Why isn't our government doing anything? Or what's going on? I thought the science showed that it was fine. And that is this book. I regularly reread it because there's always it's still so relevant, the stories of these researchers, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of them. So this is what we see. We love our phones. Advertisers and companies support us in loving this technology. And as a social worker, I saw firsthand changes in my clients when cell phones were introduced. And now when I look at the research, I am overwhelmed by the symptoms of addiction, bullying, increased depression, feelings of I'm not good enough because my social media image is not good enough. All of this is happening. And had I time, I would be working on that. But I decided to work on the radiation aspect because I felt that it just needed to get so much more light. This is, see if it's working. Wait a minute, let me go back. Okay. This is some work that was done by our advisors, engineers in Brazil, on the imaging of cell phone radiation into the brain of a child. And if you look at the colors, the lightest color, the yellow and orange, are the highest rate of intensity of absorption into the tissue. Then it goes into red, then purple, then blue. All of these are online for you to see. There's also published papers where you can see imaging, which I'm going to talk about as well. And what's so important about research that looks at the absorption into our tissue of this radiation are two things. One is that most people aren't even aware that the radiation is absorbed into their bodies. But also, when limits were set, 20 years ago, based on 30-year-old science, they didn't consider the different tissues in our bodies. Everything from your skull, your hippocampus, all your glands. how does the radiation penetrate into each? What could be the implications in terms of the developmental age of the person who has the phone to their head? So all of these questions were not answered when limits were set 20 years ago. In fact, the EPA was defunded from setting proper safety standards on cell phone radiation the same year that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, adopted limits about how much radiation a phone can emit and how much radiation a cell tower can put into the vicinity of an area, based on groups that were filled with military and industry. And they were not public health folks or physicians, and nor was there even data on the implications for children. And they were not pre-market safety tested. They still are not pre-market safety tested. Not cell phones, not our wireless devices. There also is no post-market surveillance, which is incredibly important. Just with a drug, there's post-market surveillance. You report side effects that you have. You get drugs, and you get a long sheet of side effects that have been reported, but that doesn't happen with cell phones, wireless, cell towers. In 2015, the EMF Scientist Appeal to the United Nations was issued. It's now been signed by over 240 scientists from 42 nations. They're independent scientists who have published in the peer-reviewed literature. And this is a great summary of the situation. Numerous recent scientific publications have shown that electromagnetic fields affect living organisms at levels well below international and national guidelines, meaning the limits that governments have set. Research has shown effects at levels that are lower. These effects include cancer risk, cellular risk, increase in harmful free radicals, genetic damage, structural and functional changes of the reproductive system. There's sperm damage, decreased sperm, learning and memory deficits, neurological disorders, and negative impacts on general well-being. And you can go online, both to our website and to the EMF Scientist website to read that. So what are we talking about? Electromagnetic radiation is on a spectrum because these are energized waves and they oscillate, meaning they go up and down, and they move, and our body absorbs them. So cell phones and wireless are radio frequency, which are microwaves. They are the same frequency, meaning the same oscillation as a microwave oven. They're actually very different than a microwave oven, but it's the same frequency. And we're about to introduce a new technology, 5G, of which some of the carriers, not all, are going to be utilizing frequencies which are even higher, sub-millimeter and millimeter waves that have never been commercially used. The public has never been exposed to widespread exposure to millimeter waves, nor have bees, nor have birds, nor have trees. And how we test cell phones, actually, let me back up and say this. Microwaves heat food, which would be a problem if our brains were heated, if our bodies were heated to where we were cooked. So limits are set so that we're not cooked. It's called the thermal heating is what the groups who developed these standards were concerned about, was thermal heating only. Not any of the biological changes that might happen when you have these energized waves being absorbed into your body. And what this is an image of is the way we test cell phones, a specific absorption rate test, which is antiquated, outdated, irrelevant, but it is how we do it. We have a big plastic head representative of a very large 220-pound man filled with a sugar salt liquid, and there's a thermometer in it that goes around to see what the temperature is in the head. It's not based on children's heads. And just to give you an example of how outdated our limits are, you can see the arrow for where, when limits were set, how much science there has been since then. This is the number of publications on electromagnetic fields in NIH's PubMed database. Our country, the United States, has among the highest allowable limits for cell tower radiation in the world, actually. And you can see the limits of other countries, which are Russia, Italy and China, Poland, India are much lower than ours. They are still not safe in those countries, but they are much lower because of research that was done, especially out of Russia during the Cold War, where they found the biological effects and impacts, neuropsycho effects that they, the scientists there were recognized as being an issue. Now, Dr. Davis talks about this in the book, Disconnect and the Secret History of the War on Cancer. But I want to frame this discussion with the war gaming of the science. In 1994, after two scientists found DNA damage from radiofrequency radiation, there was a memo that surfaced. It was brought to light by Microwave News. You can go online and read all about the history of this issue at Microwave News site. And what they said was, I think that we have sufficiently war-gamed the Lie, Sing, that's the names of the researchers, issue. And this really speaks to the public relations effort, the multi-million-dollar public relations effort, which has created a situation where when I talk to people, they say, I don't think that's really a problem. I would have heard about that if that were a problem. Everything from attacking researchers, which happened with Dr. Henry Lai, about was his grant using the money correctly. In Disconnect, she tells the story of Adelkofer and his research. There are many, many sad stories, actually, of scientists who performed research, found problems, and were attacked, or there were replication studies, which weren't really replication studies, that were done very soon after, and they got a lot of public relations, and then it discredited their work. In addition, in 2015, Harvard Center for Ethics put out this report, which is extremely important. It's called Captured Agency, How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industry it presumably regulates. And it talks about the money flowing into Congress, the lobbying, as well as how people who are in government, in agencies that are working on this issue, then will be working for industry or vice versa. And I just have a quote here, consumer safety, health, and privacy, along with consumer wallets, have all been overlooked, sacrificed, or raided due to unchecked industry influence. So the story of cell phones is not just about the science, it's also about the money. And just as an example of the FCC as a captured agency, and I took what they have in the book and updated a little bit with some of the more recent, because that was 2015, we're now in 2019. We have Ajit Pai as the FCC chair, former counsel for Verizon. Previously, Tom Wheeler, who brought 5G to the table, was the former FCC chair, and also the former head of the CTIA, the Wireless Association, the wireless lobby. And as you can see, it goes on. So Meredith Baker is now the head of the CTIA, but she was former FCC commissioner. We also have Brendan Carr, who I'm going to talk about a little bit during this talk, who's FCC commissioner, but also was the former lawyer for a law firm that represented the CTIA in suing the city of San Francisco when San Francisco passed a law to inform people that cell phones emitted radiation and that you could reduce your exposure. And As is typically the case with environmental health issues, funding matters. This was done by Henry Lai actually a couple years ago. There's some updated numbers on microwave news in terms of research that has looked at DNA damage. But when you look at industry-funded studies, they majority of the time find no effect. When you look at non-industry funded studies, the majority of time they have an effect. And there's some published research that's important. We have a page on Environmental Health Trust on the industry involvement in the research, where we have all of these citations showing a study that money affects the quality of the results, the existence of sponsorship and publication bias. And it is curious that the consulting firms of big tobacco are now protecting cell phone companies. And also that there's some of the same scientists who are testifying in court cases on the issues of smart meters that also testified about that and are working on the issue of secondhand smoke, that it's not dangerous. And here we are, binging with less buffering. This is what we are sold every day. It almost feels impossible to get out of the situation. And products like these are what keeps me having hope that we can fix this, because this is not okay. This is a swipe and feed. It's a plastic thing that you put the baby bottle in so that you can text while you're feeding your baby. Now, there are so many reasons that this tears me apart, from the lack of eye contact to so many. But from a radiation standpoint, you imagine that phone right over the baby's chest and the radiation being absorbed. The American Academy of Pediatrics is one of many medical associations internationally recommending reducing exposure. This is one of the letters that they sent to the Federal Communications Commission. They've sent several to our federal government saying, you haven't reviewed the standard. We're concerned about the research, and the limits need to be updated to protect children and pregnant women, and to consider the way we use devices today. Because 20 years ago, when phones first came out, babies were not handed phones in the grocery store. This is not what who could have any idea that this would be what is happening? Here's another image from a study by Claudio Fernandez and Dr. Davis and other scientists from Brazil who do with supercomputers modeling of the absorption into the body and brain. And children absorb cell phone radiation and wireless radiation deeper into their bodies compared to adults. This has been, several studies have been published on this. It's well known. And here you can see a 6-year-old and a 34-year-old with a cell phone to the head. These are computer models that use an understanding of all the tissues that they were looking at, from the eyes to the skin. And the yellow, as I said before, is the highest rate of absorption, and then it goes orange, red, purple, blue. This paper as well was the first paper, it was published in 2018, to look at virtual reality. I don't know if you've seen the cardboard apparatus. You put the cell phone in it and you hold it up to your eyes. Now, no one could have imagined we would be putting cell phones up to our eyes 20 years ago when we set these limits, but that is what they are doing in schools. And this is scientific imaging as well, looking at the penetration with a slice of the head into the brain, with the highest exposures being to the eyes, which is I almost have no words to say what I think about that, but what will be the impact of long-term use? What's even the impact of using this a few times? There has been no research to look at the long-term impact, especially to children's developing eyes, which have not yet developed the same protections as adult eyes. And there's an image there from a classroom of children who are all using the virtual reality to go on a virtual field trip. This was a free thing that Google was doing, giving this free to schools. They had a bunch of cell phones, a bunch of these cardboard apparatuses, and schools around the country were taking these field trips. And here is an advertisement by FiOS with a young child, and I don't see a cord. So I imagine this is wireless. There was also a recent study published, and there are a lot of studies. I'm not going to get a chance to go into all of them, but this was recent from the Swiss Tropical Public Health Institute, which looked at teenagers, hundreds of teenagers, and found that there was impacts to memory after 1 year of cell phone use for those teenagers that put the phone to the head. Now, I know that people say to me, oh, people don't really put their phone to their head anymore. But I beg to differ, and I think that teenage girls use phones to the head. I know that. I'm the mother of teenagers, although we use a corded phone at home. But think of all the business folks, workers in various occupations who are using cell phones all the time. I'm getting work on my house done. The contractors, they are on the phone 24/7, sleeping with the phone. I'll also note that the study noted that disturbed sleep negatively affects memory consolidation, and that, pointing out that perhaps this is a way that happens. I know that it is shown in several studies that the sleep EEG is affected by radiofrequency radiation exposure, except what you'll hear and what I heard in one conference by folks scientists who say that there's no reason to change the limits, is that doesn't mean that there's an impact on sleep, and we need to do the studies on sleep to show, we have to do that kind of research to show that until we can say that that actually is a health effect. I'd also encourage you to watch Dr. Deborah Davis's TED Talk. It's Rapid Fire with the Brain and Sperm Share and Why Care, and it is about the impacts to the most rapidly growing parts of our bodies, our reproductive organs, sperm, and the brain. That's online. Most people don't know, and certainly I didn't know before I got involved in this issue, that every cell phone and all wireless devices have information about radio frequency radiation. And most of them say that you need to keep it a distance from your body, or they say they're tested at a distance from the body. And in a funny way, they sort of say that you might exceed limits if you don't use it in the way that it's supposed to be used, which is in the way that it's tested. So that image of the head, they actually have ensure with the spacer. I'm going to go more into this on the panel as to how phones are tested, but there is a space between the head and the phone, especially with the body. I didn't show you an image of the body, but it looks like kind of like a tiny little pool, which is replicating the body, and they take the phone and they have a little spacer that goes there so that there is a distance under an inch, 10 millimeters, might be 25 millimeters. There are other devices which are tested, like the decked foam base, or your Wi-Fi router, or a gaming console. Those are tested at 20 centimeters from the measurement device. So that what that means is that you can exceed the limits if you're not following this distance, if you're not keeping that distance. And I'll just read what the Samsung laptop, and this is actually from mine. Keep safe distance from pregnant women's stomach or from lower stomach of teenagers. To ensure compliance with RF exposure guidelines, the notebook PC must be used with a minimum of 20.8 centimeter antenna separation from the body. That's about 8 inches. Now, that I haven't seen that language recently. In fact, a lot of websites have been scrubbed a little bit. And maybe I'll talk about that on the panel because I didn't have time to put it in here today. Something that's just coming out now, although scientists have known, it's been published, I know Deborah Davis has been talking about this for years, is that when you take a cell phone and you test it at body contact, like maybe, in your bra, like a lot of women do, or tucked in your spandex pants, as I see a lot of teenagers doing when they do exercise class, that when tested in those positions, they exceed our government limits. And in fact, the government of France recently was forced to release all the tests they had done, hundreds of cell phone tests, that showed that they exceeded the European limits for cell phone radiation when tested in 0 millimeter positions, meaning with no spacer between the phone and the body phantom of the testing system. And you can go online and read about PhoneGate to learn more about that. Now, wireless companies warn their shareholders of the risk, but they don't tell their customers or residents who are living where they're about to put a cell tower or a small cell. And I'd like to read what Crown Castle says. If frequency emissions from wireless handsets or equipment on our communications infrastructure, meaning the antenna and the small cells or the towers, are demonstrated to cause negative health effects, potential future claims could adversely affect our operations costs or revenues. We currently do not maintain any significant insurance with respect to these matters. I won't read Verizon's except to say you can go online on Environmental Health Trust, and we have listed a lot of the carriers, and we link to their annual reports where they inform their shareholders about this risk. And I'll note there's no insurance for these companies because mobile insurance companies have refused to cover mobile operators for years now because of the risk being so high. And there were brain cancer cases and lawsuits that were initiated about 20 years ago. Actually, it's longer than that now. Oh my gosh, because 2019, so over 20 years ago. And at that time, insurers said, you know what, this could be a lot of money. So just to read you what the Lloyds of London, there's a lot of white papers. And in their report in 2010, they say the danger with EMF, electromagnetic fields, is that like asbestos, the exposure insurers face is underestimated and could grow exponentially and be with us for many years. We also have a page dedicated to these white papers. It includes the Swiss Re reports that rank the unforeseen consequences of EMFs to the insurance industry as high. And there are two things I want to say. One is that electromagnetic fields are defined as a pollutant by insurance companies when you buy policies many times. And it is a general standard that insurance companies exclude coverage for harm from electromagnetic fields. So this is AT&T insurance you can buy for your phone. You can go online to find this. And it says they exclude pollutants. And it defines pollutants, any solid, liquid, gaseous, or thermal irritant or contaminant, including smoke vapor, soot, fumes, acid, alkalis, chemicals, artificially produced electric field, magnetic field, electromagnetic field, sound waves, microwaves, and all artificially produced ionizing or non-ionizing radiation and waste. And here is an example of an electromagnetic field exclusion policy for the City of Ann Arbor municipality. And in it, they exclude damages. This is very common. We have a number of them online so you can see them. You can ask your insurance carriers. What they've done, which is really interesting, is not only do they exclude if someone gets hurt and decides to sue, but also any supervision, damages that might come, they won't defend. If you instructed, recommended, gave warning advice, or didn't give advice given or what should have been given in connection with A or B above, meaning electromagnetic radiation or that you might be harmed by it. I think that says a lot. This is the CTIA, the wireless industry website. If you want to learn about 5G, this is their sweet, lovely beginning of a long web page with video about 5G. What is 5G? You'll see cars. It's about self-driving cars. Your phone, video, drones. And what I would... This is what it is about too, but let me just back up and say it's about machine-to-machine communication, not just about you communicating with your phone or taking voice calls, but machines communicating with other machines. Your washing machine communicating with your phone, or maybe communicating with the smart meter or another machine which is collecting the information. So it's been really hyped up as something that we want, that we need, that we have to have. And industry is really putting that forward. They're pushing. They're calling it a race to 5G. And I can't help but think about other races that we've been in worldwide, maybe arms races. And we're running without looking. So this is what we don't see on the CTIA page. This is an antenna system, called a small cell, in front of a window of a person who sent me this and said, you got to tell me what's going on. I heard you're working on this. This is in front of my window. Should I be worried? And I'm going to talk about what is a small cell. So we often think, and once you've heard me talk, you're going to know, at the top, there are transmitting antennas. They're like mini cell towers. Except they have antennas, cellular antennas, that will be radiating more. This is a densification, more signals, so we can do more things with this 5G and also with 4G and the current technology we have. But also, the poles that you have in your neighborhood, if you have utility poles, they're going to go higher. If you have a street light, that can go higher, and then it gets capped off with the antennas. If you have a measly little street light, you might have to swap out that light or that wooden utility pole and have a wider, stronger pole because it has to hold the heavy antennas and the big equipment boxes, which are on the next image you can see over there next to the window. These are two different antennas, two different pictures of two different things, but I'm trying to give you the picture of aspects of a small cell. Then there are the equipment boxes that hold like the guts that make the antennas work. Sometimes they're on the ground, and industry likes to call them street furniture, which is very nice. What a nice piece of street furniture that is. It's the size of a refrigerator box. At least in my district, we were going to have new zoning, which would have allowed 20 cubic feet of equipment boxes to be placed right in front of the house in the right-of-way. And then you also get equipment boxes for different carriers that might also be on the pole. Most communities say we do not want that. That looks ugly. And here's another situation. This is a house where this small cell appeared. The homeowner investigated. She had no idea this was going to go up a few years ago. Turns out the application and the permit was for not where it is right now, but down the road. Except she can't get anyone to fix the problem. And it's a sad case. And she recently testified to our city council in Montgomery County about this. I mean, everyone should be outraged that it is not even supposed to be there. When a local group, a resident group working on this looked into this, there were over a dozen of these installations which were where they were not supposed to be, or had one problem or the other that was not following the permit that they had gotten. And we haven't found a good way to address that. The council says, well, we don't have authority. Apparently no one has authority to fix this. So in your community, I hope you figure out a way so that someone has authority to be in control of these things. This is a study by Dr. Cindy Russell, published in Environmental Research, that was a review about 5G wireless telecommunications expansion and looked at studies that have been done for decades, way back during for military, because millimeter waves were initially developed for military applications, for weapons, which I'm going to talk about later. Impacts to the eyes, changes in yeast growth. And she also talks about the fact that 5G is going to utilize the current technologies we have, which are the frequencies we have, and add in these other ones. And those frequencies, we already have research showing harm. Now, most recently, the European Science Agency, actually, and I wanted to get a slide but didn't have time, referred to this and talked about answering the question, to what degree is 5G an emerging health and environmental risk? And they referred to this paper and said, and some other papers, and said this could be, have serious consequences to the environment because of what we know already, because we know enough to know. Science, there's always questions, there's always open questions, but we know enough to know. Many scientists say it is proven that this is harmful based on the research we have now. Yes, you can ask more questions, you can always do more research, but that's not what we need right now. What we need is to protect the public and the environment. And the 5G appeal was signed. This was now signed on to, this is another appeal by over 200 scientists calling for a moratorium on the rollout of 5G because it will substantially increase exposure to radiofrequency radiation that has been proven to be harmful for humans and the environment. Please go to 5G appeal, and I have the website there as well. Now, so, amidst all of this, last year, there was a Senate committee hearing with FCC Commissioner Carr, who I talked about before, and a number of elected officials, including a mayor, Mayor Paul Tenekin, who said that his constituents have been saying, what about the health problems with these small cells being rolled out in 5G? Commissioner Carr responded that the FCC, as well as other agencies that are experts in health and safety issues, are always looking closely at these issues, staying up to date on the latest science. They've looked at all the studies and all the information, and they've reached the determination that these are safe. Now, that is not true. We know that that is not true, and even the carriers won't say it is safe. They will say there is no proof of harm, or they will say authorities have not concluded or established that it's harmful. So, in response, Senator Blumenthal and Congresswoman Anna Eshoo wrote a letter asking for this proof of safety. They even gave a deadline, which has since passed, and as far as I know, there is no health and safety agency that is looking over all the science. There's no team of medical experts in the U.S. government checking to make sure this is safe and issuing reports. That actually does not exist. There's a complete dropping of the ball with the EPA being defunded. The FDA supposedly can do something, but they're not doing anything, and I'm going to talk about that soon. So I also would encourage you, because I hope you leave here and you go online and you check out the resources I'm talking about. And you can watch the press conference where Senator Blumenthal speaks with Berkshire Litchfield Environmental Council. Blake Levitt, who has been working on this for years, talks about environmental issues. There's also someone from the Communications Worker of America, talking about concerns for the workers who are working. And I can say that Environmental Health Trust gets regularly contacted by workers who've been injured from antennas, or maybe they are working on electrical systems on roofs, and there's not enough signage. There's so many issues with a lack of safety protocols in place for what's about to happen here. I talked about millimeter and submillimeter waves being used for weapons. The active denial system is a crowd control weapon. It makes your skin feel like it's on fire. This is just a screen save from the History Channel where they talk about it. And that's the kind of frequencies that are being utilized, but at a lower power, except that scientists have shown that our skin could be absorbing this radiation, the sweat gland, in a unique way and highly absorbed into a certain part of our skin. We know that deployment is going to increase exposure overall. We know this because industry says it. So this is a slide from Ericsson where they are saying that those countries that have stricter radio frequency limits, I showed you that slide where the United States had the highest, and Poland and Italy and Russia, India had lower, that the rollout of 5G networks will be a major problem. They also have a white paper on the rollout of 4G being a problem in those same countries. Because when we talk about small cells, this isn't just about 5G. It's about the densification of 4G, and these poles and all the infrastructure they put in will then be capped with 5G. They'll be 5G ready, and when it's time for 5G to be put on, it will be put on. And here's an example of a proposal in my town, in Montgomery County, and you can see all the little triangles are proposed. They were applications for small cells put in by Crown Castle. A couple years ago, that started a whole uproar. Since then, there are actually some half-done situations in front of people's houses. Everything's on hold while the county, the residents, and the community figures out what they can do about this issue to have authority. The residents there have organized and do not want these small cells in their neighborhoods. At every level, federal, state, and local, there are efforts to strip our ability to have a say about these installations. The FCC passed a bill, a small cell bill, and I'm just going to quote from a memo which we have up on our website by Next Century Cities and lawyer Mark Del Bianco. The order is a blatant effort by the FCC to strengthen the hand of carriers in negotiations with local governments over small cell deployment and to limit the ability of local governments to negotiate. This is incredibly important that all citizens are aware that this is going on. There are lawsuits going on. It's been moved to the Ninth Circuit, where communities are saying, we don't want to be preempted. This is going to strip local control and state control. There's lobbying going on now about that as well. At the state level, there are streamlining bills passed in 21 states, which make it so that if your town wants to have more restrictive policy or ensure that there's public hearings and a distance between the pole and your house, that's preempted by the state. So we just had this happening in Maryland. We stopped it last year. It's come back. When in California, SB 649 was put forward and passed, it was ultimately vetoed by the governor because of the widespread opposition from cities, organizations from all over. And what it brought out was all of these letters from scientists, which you can use in your own town and you can read to bring to your own mayor and city officials. And you can go onto our website where we have a list of all the letters from scientists that have been written about 5G, about SB 649, talking about the science and warning that they should not pass this bill, that 5G, 4G, and wireless, these small cells and macro towers are not safe. As well, firefighters in California have long lobbied not to have antennas on top of their stations because of a study and impacts to firefighters when antennas were put on several years ago. And you can actually go online on our YouTube channel and look up firefighters or on our webpage and see them testifying about their concerns about the health impacts of the antennas. And they were able to get themselves carved out of SB 649. There are small cell ordinances to protect or to retain authority in many communities nationwide. We have a list of ordinances from Burlington, Massachusetts, where they have a draft policy where they're saying, well, if you want to put up one of these, the companies, every year we have to recertify you. We need to have hearings, and you need to pay a fee so that we can do this recertification process. Hello? Can you hear me now? Okay. That a company walked away after hearing about this draft ordinance that was coming too. Petaluma has no small cells should be within 200 feet of every residence. And I can say that in our town, there was a new zoning being put forward where small cells or wireless facilities would be placed within 60 feet. At one point it was 20 feet. We pushed it to 60. But that's just not good enough either, because that means that I would get one right across the street from my house, but not in front of my house. And there are many others, like Fairfax, California. Small cells are prohibited in residential zones. What people often say, well, what do we do? Can we fix this? I feel overwhelmed. And to that, I would say that people are getting involved. We need to get involved at every level of government. I know there's a group here, 5G Small Cell Awareness, a local New York group, and in every state, and in many accolades to all your incredible work. There are people who knew nothing about this, who are getting educated, and who are learning about it and saying, you know, we want a right to say what goes in our front yard. We have a right to know about this issue. So what I recommend is addressing this at the federal level, at the very top, and also in your community with your elected officials, neighbors, friends, and family. We need to halt streamlining bills. I can just use this. This is fine. Actually, can I unhook this? Sorry. Okay, I'll just keep it like that. Okay. Halt for 4G, 5G streamlining bills at the state and federal level, and there are a couple moving forward, and you can go online to learn more about those. Also, Scientists for Wired Technology is another website that has information. Physicians for Safe Technology, as well as Americans for Responsible Technology. We need to enact policies to reduce occupational exposure. I think that this is incredibly important, is the exposures to workers. Everything from the workers on the poles, as well to teachers in schools, because we need to reduce exposures in schools, and instead what's happening is they're being increased. And now, as an example of what can happen, this is hot off the press, New Hampshire House Bill 522 is an act establishing a commission to study the environmental and health effects of evolving 5G technology. And in this bill, you can go online to read it, the best part, they're saying, hey, let's see what's going on with 5G, but the best part is the questions that they want the commission to consider. A whole list of like every question that every person who learns about this would ask, like, wait, for example, why have more than 220 of the world's leading scientists signed an appeal to the World Health Organization and United Nations to protect public health from wireless radiation, and nothing has been done? This is one of the questions. Go to the bill and please read it. We need accountability in our federal health agencies because no one is watching the store. For example, just in November, the world's largest study on cell phone radiation, cell phone levels of radiation, was done by our US government at a price tag of $30 million. Now, this is excerpts from their fact sheet of the National Toxicology Program of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. They exposed rats and mice to cell phone radiation for 2 years. Now, they normally live about 3 years, but they just did to 2 years. And they found increases. And They looked at the numbers of tumors and the different types of tumors, and they came to conclusions as to their confidence as to if it was from the cell phone radiation or maybe they didn't know what it was from. They concluded clear evidence of an association of the tumors of the schwannomas of the heart, some evidence, which is still meaning evidence that there is an association in the gliomas of the brains of the male rats. These tumors were found in the male rats, and also a different type of tumor in the adrenal glands in one group of male rats. There were also increases in cardiomyopathy in the right ventricle, DNA damage in certain brain regions, and statistically significant increases in different groups and different exposures in the prostate gland, the pituitary gland, the adrenal gland, liver, and pancreas, but they didn't feel that they could say that was some or clear evidence at this time. But what is so important about this study is it was so carefully controlled. No one has done, that $30 million price tag was because they made sure that they could know how much radiation the animals were exposed to. Whereas when you do studies on people who use cell phones for the long term, you really can't know. You're relying on their memory. So it's been argued that those studies we need the well-done animal studies to be added to that. Now I need to add something else really important that I might not have time to get through my slides, which is that the types of tumors that they found in the male rats are the same cell types as the tumors that have been found in studies on humans, the case control studies on humans, where they looked at people who use cell phones for over 10 years. They looked at under 10 years, but the people who use cell phones over 10 years and were described as heavy users developed the same cell type cancers, acoustic neuromas and glioblastomas. Now, I have a question. What do you think a heavy use would be in these studies? Anyone? I can't hear you. An hour a day? Well, that's good. That's good, actually. I thought you'd say like 10 hours, but the heavy use was defined about under 30 minutes a day with cell phone to the ear. And those studies were done by Dr. Hardell, who I hope I'll get to. I'm going to talk about some of his research. He says, as do other scientists, that this radiation meets criteria as a human carcinogen. Now, what's so interesting is that the Food and Drug Administration nominated the National Toxicology Program to do this study in 1999. Because remember, we adopted the U.S. government, the EPA was defunded, we adopted limits, but we didn't even know, nor did we have research on long-term exposure. We didn't have adequate studies on long-term exposure to radiofrequency radiation. So the FDA said, well-done animal studies should be done, and they nominated the NTP to do it. And here is Dr. John Bucher, who at NIH, who's talking in one of the 2 congressional hearings done in the United States, federal hearings on cell phone radiation and health. And he's talking about how, if you can see from the pictures, the animals were in underground bunkers. I mean, they worked so hard to make sure that they were careful about how much radiation the animals were exposed to. And you can see the bunkers going underground. You can watch him testimony about this study, which was going to be the end-all, be-all of all studies to show if cell phone radiation was safe and really add to just cap it off. And he talks about research from the University of California that they were doing on children. And what I wanted to say, because I hope everyone goes and watches this congressional hearing, is that those studies were completed, published, and they indeed found behavioral problems related to cell phone exposure. After the National Toxicology Program findings were released, clear evidence of cancer in the male rats, the heart tumors, the Food and Drug Administration issued a statement that after reviewing the study, we disagree. with the conclusions of their final report. This was a peer-reviewed report, extensively reviewed, unlike a 3-day peer review, which is unprecedented. They disagree with the findings of clear evidence of carcinogenic activity. And they believe existing safety limits for cell phones remain acceptable for protecting the public health. That's online, you can watch that. Now, Dr. Ronald Melnick is an NIH scientist, 26 years, now retired, who helped design the study. Remember, it took, over a decade. He's now one of our scientific advisors, and that image is from a talk he just gave at the 5G Wireless Forum in Michigan, which I would urge everyone to learn more, to go to the 5G Wireless Forum. Just search it on our website, ehtrust.org. And he's written an op-ed in The Hill where he calls out the FDA and says the FDA needs to do their job, and that this shows that there are effects at non-thermal levels, and that there needs to be action taken to look at our limits and the whole issue of radio frequency, look at the information from the National Toxicology Program study and do a quantitative risk assessment so that we can develop proper safety standards, which we don't have. He also published in Environmental Research, and that's a quote I have there, an article debunking all the common criticisms of the National Toxicology Program study, which you've probably heard or will hear when you go online to read about it. And he does so with citation after citation in technical detail. And the interesting thing is that the FDA says they reject the findings, but why? Where are the technical details? Because what they put out on their page is all debunked by what Dr. Melnick talks about in his paper. He also talks about something super important, because I'm not going to go too much into the science here. I'm talking more about policy. But that is that the majority of studies that looked at oxidative stress found effects. And we know that oxidative stress leads to a myriad of illnesses. He talks about that in that paper. That's in Environmental Research. And what he says is, without directly causing DNA damage, radiofrequency may induce oxidative DNA damage and thereby initiate or promote tumor development. And there's also really important research done, it's by Dr. Lurchel, which looked at radiofrequency in combination with a toxic exposure that you know is going to cause tumors in the animals and rodents, and found a tumor promotion effect. So a synergistic effect increased tumors in the animals that were treated with both the toxic agent and the radiofrequency radiation. And that was at very low levels. And that should concern us all, considering how much pollution we have in our environment. So what Environmental Health Trust scientists and also other scientists, so Dr. Hardell, Dr. Melnick, Dr. Carpenter, Dr. Miller, Dr. Davis, Lloyd Morgan, myself, we wrote a letter to the FDA and we asked for the technical documentation on why are they rejecting this study. We've not received an answer. I talked about Dr. Hardell, who's did research on case control studies on people who hold cell phones to their ear and what was their risk for brain cancer and neck tumors. As well, he looked at their exposure to cordless phones, which is really important because it makes his research, the exposures were more carefully looked at, because you might not use a cell phone a lot, and you might be in this study, but you might use your home cordless phone. And home cordless phones emit radiofrequency radiation as well. But he accounted for that in his research. He also was a researcher who looked at Agent Orange and the herbicides in Agent Orange in the 80s and did research in the 70s as well. He's now the leading expert, one of the leading experts on cell phone radiation, and he's published several papers, both his research on people using cell phones as well as reviews of the research, and states that it is carcinogenic to humans, and guidelines need to be urgently revised. As well, in 2018, another study, a review incorporating the NTP findings, concluded that radiofrequency is a class, can be regarded as a human carcinogen based on the research that we have now with the NTP. There's also the Ramazzini Institute study. There's an Italian research group that did research and also found at much lower levels, they found the same kind of tumors in their male rats as NIH found in theirs. And this, despite that, is what you'll find on the webpage EMF and Health, which is the website of the Mobile and Wireless Forum. They say that national and independent expert panels have reviewed the research and concluded that the radiation from base stations and cell phones, that it hasn't confirmed any public health risks. I should have read it completely, but you can see the quote there. There's actually a lot of web pages and glossy, shiny, pretty brochures about how it hasn't been proven that cell phones are harmful, funded by the wireless industry, in addition to research studies. And here we have the World Health Organization EMF Project, which has a fact sheet in 2014 that's probably brought to every meeting by industry, which says, to date, no adverse health effects have been established to be caused by mobile phones, and they also say the same thing about base stations and wireless networks. Now, their fact sheet on wireless, on base stations is from 2006, but I find it's still brought to many meetings. The reason I'm sharing this is because a lot of people think, well, it's the World Health Organization. What? This is an esteemed group, but what they don't know is that in the World Health Organization, there are two entities. One is the World Health Organization EMF Project, of which I am showing you statements that they have online. And that was started with industry money several years ago. The other is the International Agency for the Research on Cancer, which created a working group of independent experts, vetted experts, and they concluded in 2011 that this radiation was a possible carcinogen. That was in 2011. The paper I showed you states that now, because of the additional research studies that have been published, if they were to meet again, these scientists believe that it would be concluded it is a human carcinogen. So Dr. Hardell actually published a paper in the International Journal of Oncology talking about that, what I just showed you before, which I'll show you back, the EMF Project Group, the World Health Organization EMF Project Group, and how there is money from industry was used to start the EMF project. It was actually funneled through a hospital, only found out about a decade after. And there was a group that was formed at the same time called ICNIRP, which stands for the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. And if you hear that, you'll think, well, that sounds very important. And indeed, many countries look to that group as the experts. And what they recommend, several countries will use as their limits for allowable cell phone and radio frequency radiation. Except that there is a lot of conflicts of interest, of which you can go online to read about the connections to industry for people who are in ICNIRP, as well as in the WHO EMF project. So when you're told by your school principal, or when Verizon comes and gives a talk like they just did in New Jersey by someone who contacted me the other day, and they say, the World Health Organization says it's not established. they interestingly neglect to talk about the International Agency for the Research on Cancer of the World Health Organization. And also, there's a history there that's really important. And people say, oh, you know, it's just, a lot of people often think if I start talking about industry influence that I'm, you know, these are just these, what is the term that's used? Conspiracy theories. And what I'd say is, you know, this is just good business. It's good business practice. This is what's happening in many other environmental health issues, and it just is what is. Follow the money. Follow the money. So something else that is a real concern with these small cells and 4G and 5G densification is the impact to wildlife, birds, and bees. There is many studies that have been published. I'm going to quote Dr. Alfonso Balmori, who did a lot of research reviews on impacts to the environment. He says, existing guidelines do not protect wildlife. Further research in this area is urgent. There are studies that show disruption to bird navigation. Published research on bees has found reduced motor activity, biochemical changes, inducing the worker piping signal, which is a sign of stress in a colony, decline in colony strength, changes in the queen egg-laying rate as well. You can go online, we have a section on bees. There was a study that was just done on, you know, I showed you a cell phone to the head of a child and the absorption into the head. Well, what about the absorption into insects or animals? So this was a study that looked at absorption of the submillimeter and millimeter waves into different insects, just a few, and found that there was an increase the higher the frequency until the frequency was about the size of the insect, and then there was a change. But as you can see here at 2 gigahertz, with, remember, the blue is not as much absorption, and then it goes to purple and red. And then you see at 24 gigahertz, more absorption, and 120 gigahertz, much higher. Actually, a little bit less, it starts to, but look at what's happening around the body. And if you go to the paper is online, you can fully see more imaging and find that study. But what I think is the most important thing about this paper is that it says this is the first paper that investigates the exposure of electric fields with radio frequencies associated with 5G. How is it that we're rolling something out, we're racing to something, and the first paper was just published, and we know what we know? I mean, that's to me the story here. Tree damage. This is a conference that you can watch online done in the Netherlands, and also the PowerPoints are available from a physicist, Volker Skorp, who talks about impacts to trees. Again, a great resource. We also have a page all about impacts to plants and trees. There is published peer-reviewed papers on injuries to trees around mobile base stations. And there's a study that was published, Radiofrequency Radiation Injures Trees Around Mobile Base Stations, which went through all of these trees that they followed with a field study over time, and found that when there were antennas, and so here's the tree, and well, you can see from the picture, there's the antennas, the tree, that at first there's damage that's shown on the side of the tree that is absorbing the radiation. And over time, actually, and there's a kind of a companion piece, Tree Damage Caused, an observation guide, which I have on the PowerPoint there, where they actually have pictures of trees in 2008, in 2010, 2012, and then they show when the tree was cut down because it got so sick and they had to cut it down. And as you can see from this picture, the damage on the side of the tree where the highest radiation would be. And they actually did radiation measurements on both sides of the trees for this field study. And they have the measurements listed also in the observation guide. Because what's happening is the tree is absorbing the radiation. And so it's not as high on the other side. Wireless exposures in schools is something I've been working on as well. I'm going to fly a little bit through it, but I think it's one of the most important issues related to wireless technology. In 2011, the Council of Europe issued Resolution 1815 where they said give preference to wired internet connections and strictly regulate the use of mobile phones by school children. Except what I'm seeing in schools is one-on-one devices, wireless access points in all the rooms, sometimes 2 or 3, and plus cell phones being used as part of the curriculum. This is an ad it was on Facebook, the Verizon Foundation, putting forward how important tablets are in the classroom. Your devices are made for amazing. Look at how close those devices are to the bodies. And this is scientific imaging, again, by Claudio Fernandez and engineers in the Federal Universities of Brazil, looking at the penetration into, these are actually looking with 2 different focuses of the penetration of the radiation from a tablet into the brain tissue of a 6-year-old child, with yellow being the highest. And this would be the device here, which is where young children hold the devices. Now, I just wanted to point this out that in Los Angeles, several years ago, when $1.3 million was spent on iPads, special education teachers started a Facebook group, Repairs Not iPads, which raises the important question of why are we not fixing the infrastructure, class size, all of these issues which are so important in schools before we're just dumping in all these devices which are breaking. Kids are on porn. I can't tell you how many parents call me and say, well, my big problem, I heard you work on iPads in the classes, and my kids you do not know what they are looking at in the classrooms. Or when they're out in the schoolyard, like, can you help us with that? I mean, in recess. So there's so many issues related to schools. The United Educators of San Francisco and many other unions have been addressing this. They just passed a resolution. We did a webinar. I did it with Physicians for Safe Technology, Dr. Cindy Russell, on cell phone and wireless radiation in schools and what teachers can do and what policymakers can do. You can go online to watch that. The Collaborative for High Performance Schools has criteria for a low EMF classroom. There are solutions. The New Jersey Educational Association has recommendations to reduce exposure and minimize risks from electronic devices. There are bans and restrictions on Wi-Fi in school worldwide. In the middle, you'll see St. Augustine School in Italy, where they're removing the Wi-Fi router. And now I'm going to move on to international action on cell phones and wireless and all over. So this just happened a few days ago. Court ordered the Italian government to publicize cell phone risks. Now already in Italy, there are 2 court cases that have concluded that cell phone radiation caused tumors, and people have gotten money for their cell phone related tumors. So now I can add Italy to this list of governments who advise and have information about how to reduce exposure to cell phone radiation. Now, all the countries on this list are not the same in how they've approached this, but all of them say something to the degree of, well, you should reduce exposure to children, or you should reduce exposure. They don't say what the US government says, which is, if you are worried, and if you are worried, here's what you can do, and they give 3 little ideas, which is just not good enough. France is a great model. They have websites, web pages on how to reduce exposure to computers, to cell phones in detail. And we have all of this online. This is from French Polynesia, part of their 30-second video where they show what things emit radiation in your home. And there are regulations on people being informed about cell phone radiation when you go to buy a phone in France, India, Belgium, Israel, French Polynesia, and Berkeley, California, which I'm going to talk about, which passed a law that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Belgium has banned the sale of mobile phones designed for young children. They've also banned Wi-Fi in nursery school in Ghent, Belgium. In 2010 and amended in 2011, I think I talked about how in San Francisco, they passed an ordinance that retailers must display posters and stickers informing people that cell phones emit radiation, and they had posters, and I'll read what one of them says, limit cell phone use by children. Well, what happened was the CTIA immediately hit them with a lawsuit, and after a series of legal challenges, San Francisco wasn't able to enforce the law they had passed. And here we are with ads about loving your phone. And here's a child hugging Alexa. There's a video online. It's singing Twinkle Twinkle to her. It's on. And there's a fine print warning for these virtual assistants that the device should be installed and operated with a minimum distance of 20 centimeters between the radiator and your body. But parents don't know that, and certainly toddlers don't know that. So Berkeley, California wanted to inform people about the fine print warnings and passed this ordinance that says, if you carry or use your phone in a pants or shirt pocket or tucked into a bra when the phone is on and connected to a wireless network, you may exceed the federal guidelines for exposure to radio frequency radiation. This potential is greater for children. Now, that was removed because when the CTIA, the wireless industry, sued Berkeley immediately after passing this, in the court deliberations, that got nixed. Harvard lawyer Lawrence Lessig is defending this ordinance pro bono. You can watch court proceedings online at Environmental Health Trust's YouTube page, which are fascinating because the CTIA is arguing that this is violating the retailer's free speech rights. And we're sort of in the middle of this because it went to the Supreme Court, which then sent it back for the appeals court to look at in light of some other cases. We have the largest database on worldwide actions at Environmental Health Trust. You can click on different countries and learn about what's happening worldwide. And in the middle of all that, these advertisements, I just think they're so powerful to put them in here because this is what we are being sold. Binge on the beach. You're on a beautiful beach. Why would we want to look at our phones? Policy changes are needed. If you want to ask, how do I reduce exposure? The first thing I'll say is we need policy change because with 5G, it's involuntary exposure. You can take your cell phone and you can keep it away from your body. You can hardwire your laptop at home, but you can't stop the radiation from cell towers permeating, your body when you're outside wanting to enjoy your yard. So this is front and center as policy change. I am going to talk about things that people can do, but I would ask everyone, people, maybe you haven't gotten involved in politics or spoken at meetings. I know I had never spoken at a council meeting before. I did not know who my elected council people even were. Before I learned about this issue several years ago, it's been a long time, I thought that I thought this would be easily fixed. About a decade now, when I first learned about this. And I got more and more involved the more I realized, how important it is that we change this for our children, especially our teenagers, babies that have yet to be born. So Environmental Health Trust, ehtrust.org, Americans for Responsible Technology, Physicians for Safe Technology. Find or start a local group. Those are great resources. Also Scientists for Wired Technology. The Baby Safe Project, I'm sure many people are aware of. The Grassroots Environmental Education, as well as Environmental Health Trust, launched this campaign that's been signed on by over 200 doctors to reduce exposure to pregnant women. And if you go online, because you got a lot of homework to do, and watch the press conference, you'll see Dr. Hugh Taylor, who's chief of obstetrics at Yale, talk about his research with mice exposed to cell phone radiation and how the offspring of the pregnant mice had poor memory and they were hyperactive. If mice could have ADHD, that's what they would have. I think that, our children and the fetus are the most vulnerable, and they need to be protected. So please go online. They have a lot of resources. I also have in the back a lot of handouts. I hope you'll take some with you. They're downloadable off our website, Baby Safe Project. If you contact them, you want to share this information with your community, they will send you brochures to share as well. And this is a, the sound doesn't work. Is it not working? Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. There we have a short PSA about how to reduce exposure based on the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations. And we have these postcards, flyers. Again, they're all on the back table, as well as the table here. Plus, we have a newsletter. It goes out once a month. It has the latest news on electromagnetic fields, and that way you can stay up to date, and it's a really useful resource to share with other people as well. That's at ehtrust.org. Keep the cell phone out of your pants. The Cleveland Clinic recommends it's best to keep your cell phone as far away from the testes as you can. Make shorter phone calls. Less time with the phone means, with the phone to your ear means less exposure. And this is actually from the Connecticut Department of Public Health, which has a fact sheet on cell phones. And they say, scientists agree it is wise to reduce exposure to radio frequency energy from cell phones whenever possible. At home, get a corded landline. Also at work, whenever you can, make your voice calls on a corded landline. Do not sleep with your phone in your bed or near your head. The California Department of Health put out a fact sheet on how to reduce exposure. This is one of theirs. Have the phones downstairs turned off, or turn it off if it's going to be in your bedroom. If you need an alarm clock, please get a battery-powered alarm clock. Create a sleep sanctuary, especially at night. And this is how people start off with this issue. Remove all the screens, the wireless from your bedroom. Don't forget gaming consoles and cordless phones. Gaming consoles emit a lot of radiation nonstop, as well as the wireless handsets. But I went into one mother's house, and her teenage son had 4 consoles next to the bed. And I had a meter. I was measuring the radiation, and the look on her face, I felt so bad. But I'm so glad that we found out and that she understood that those were emitting radiation all night long as well. No screens, at least an hour, I'd say 2 hours before nighttime. I have blue blocking material for all my tech screens, which is really important because of the impact of blue light on eyes, which is another super important area. Please read about that. It's really, really important too. Replace the Wi-Fi with hardwired connections. Turn off, if you haven't done that yet, because sometimes it takes time to get all the hardware, turn off the Wi-Fi at night and wireless devices at night as a first step, and then hardwire with wires. And when you do that, and we have all of this online, I have about 4 minutes left, remember that if you hardwire your computer, You need to also turn the Wi-Fi off of your laptop as well, because even if you're using a wired connection, your laptop is still going to be sending out signals, checking to see what base stations it can connect with nearby. So that's super important. Also, Siri and Bluetooth need to be turned off as well. And sometimes you need to get adapters, which you can buy. Something that is a critically important piece of information I should have said is that wireless devices emit even when you're not using them. They're always checking in. So you have a cell phone, it's sitting here, you're not using it, but it's powered on. It's checking in with a nearby cell tower. Like, hi, are you there? I'm here. I want you to know where I am. They're having this digital handshake, this communication going on all the time. And those peaks are going through us, our bodies. So turn off your phone whenever possible. Never have laptops, computers on your lap, even if they're wired. And yes, you can hardwire many tablets, not all. But also because of the extremely low frequency fields, which I didn't talk about because I didn't have time, but they emit a lower frequency radiation. Always have them on a table. You can pre-download applications beforehand. So if you're handing your child a device, have the Wi-Fi off, Bluetooth off, Wi-Fi antennas off, and have it on a table with a blue light blocking screen. Don't forget your printer as well. The New Jersey Education Association talks about this is super important, is all the peripherals you have. Keep the phones out of the bra. There's published research, case reports on young women developing tumors directly under where they store the phone in their bra. Don't make calls and power your phone completely off in cars, elevators, trains, and buses because the metal reflects the radiation, and also each time you pass and go into a different service area, the phone peaks in terms of the radiation because it's connecting to the new tower. And I'm going to end here. Oh, switch to an analog. Wanted to get to the smart meters. To an analog utility meter, or advocate so that you can remove the smart meter or the digital meter from your home because of how much radiation they emit. And there's going to be a panel discussion at 7:30 where we do more questions. And this is egregious. Here, I'll go back. Someone's taking a picture of that, so I'll just leave that up. There's so many things being sold that we have a lot of work to do. And Environmental Health Trust is where you can learn more. Thank you so much. And I'm glad to talk to people over here.